Thank you, Chris. Thank all of you here. How about this? Great convention. How about the President of the United States, Donald Trump? What an incredible patriot. What a great president. What a wonderful man to serve with. I have the honor of working with him, doing the things that it takes on a daily basis to make America great again. And there is nobody that wakes up every single day working harder for the working men and women of this country who were left behind for too long to finally give them another chance at the American dream than our great president, Donald Trump. Just think about when we fight to defend our rights, and our Second Amendment rights especially, that are so often under attack. One of the most important things he's done as president is to put good people on the Supreme Court who understand it's their job to interpret the Constitution as it's written, not rewrite it in the vein of their desires. You know, there was a case not long ago called the Heller case, where the Supreme Court had the opportunity to determine whether or not the militia meant you could only have a Second Amendment right to a firearm if you were in the military, or did it apply to every individual citizen? Now, the good news is that the Supreme Court determined that it was the right of every individual, not just those in the military, to keep and bear arms. The bad part of that decision is it was a 5-4 decision. Now, just imagine that. When people wonder, when you work so hard to go out and vote and get your friends to go out and vote, imagine if this election would have turned out differently. And instead of a 5-4 decision to allow each and every one of us to have the right to bear arms in our homes to protect our family, that 5-4 decision would have gone the other way. That would have said the only way you could have a right to bear arms is if you serve in the military. That's why these elections are so important. That's why it's so important that President Trump is in office doing the things that he said he would do. How about that for somebody campaigning, saying I'm going to do certain things, and then he gets in office and actually carries those things out? If any of you watched the State of the Union just a few weeks ago in the House chamber, first of all, it was great hearing Donald Trump talk about the things that he's done to get this country back on track and how it's working, how it's rebuilding our military, our men and women in uniform, finally giving them a pay raise that they deserve, finally giving them the tools that they need to be able to train safely, finally getting people back to work, having an economy that works for everybody so we could rebuild our middle class. And as the president went through, did you notice when the president would say, we've got the lowest unemployment among African Americans in the history of our country. We've got the lowest unemployment amongst Hispanic Americans in the history of our country. We have more women small businesses starting up than we've ever seen. And Nancy Pelosi and her liberal lieutenants sat down every single time we all stood up. I was proud to stand up and applaud that. Every American should be proud to stand up, regardless of who you voted for president. That should not be a partisan issue, to celebrate other people's success. And then, of course, I think the most telling was when President Trump said, America will never be a socialist country. Now, we would all applaud that. You would think everybody would applaud that. But again, Nancy Pelosi and her liberal lieutenants sat down and could not even stand up for that statement that America will never be a socialist nation. And so it shows us what's at stake. It shows us what this battle is for. I want to thank you for coming here to stand up for our Second Amendment rights by joining and being a member of the NRA and what the National Rifle Association stands for. What you stand for is preserving those freedoms. Those freedoms aren't free. Those freedoms don't just come to us because we were given to them in a document. We get those freedoms because we have to fight for them every day. Others have fought before us. Men and women who have sacrificed their blood, given their lives for our country so that we can have those freedoms. We still have to fight for those freedoms every day. I have been honored to work with the NRA, not just since I've been a member of Congress, but this goes back to when I was a state representative. In 1999, if you remember, the city of New Orleans started what was going to become a national movement. Right after the big tobacco lawsuits, they said they're going to go after the gun industry. So they started lawsuits in cities to bankrupt the gun industry. And so a friend of mine came to me and he said, they're suing, all these trial lawyers from all around the country are suing my little handgun store, a friend of his handgun store. And so I filed a bill to say, well, first of all, if you're selling a legal product, you shouldn't be sued because somebody uses that product to go do something bad, if the product is a properly sold product. Well, next thing you know, I get a call from the NRA. Wayne Lapierre, who's still with the NRA. What a great job Wayne Lapierre does for the NRA. So back in 1999, Wayne Lapierre calls me and goes, Steve, we like your bill and we'd like to support your bill. Well, I'm a young state representative. The NRA's calling saying they want to support your bill. I said, I'd love to have your support. Then a couple weeks later, he called back and he goes, you know, the president of the NRA would like to come and testify for your bill. Well, if you remember back in 1999, the president of the NRA was this guy called Charlton Heston. So Charlton Heston wants to come and testify for my bill. Now, look, my mom never really paid much attention to any piece of legislation I ever filed, but my mom paid real close attention that day. She goes, Steve, can I be in the committee room when Charlton Heston comes and testifies? Let me tell you, that was a packed house. And we passed that bill. I've still got that picture. Charlton Heston signed the copy of my bill. The next day, it went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, by the way. The next day, the city of New Orleans lawsuit against gun makers was thrown out of court, and they did it all across the country. And we were able to stop those lawsuits from bankrupting the gun makers of this nation. And then a few years later, that horrible tragedy happened in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit. And once again, our gun rights were under attack. You would have never thought you would see this in the United States of America, but they went door to door taking away people's guns. They gave an order to confiscate the guns of law-abiding citizens in the city of New Orleans, and it actually happened. And so somebody came to me, this lady named Miss Connie, and she was in her home in uptown New Orleans, and this was after Katrina. There was no 911. There was no power. There was no ability if somebody was doing something bad to get somebody else to come and protect you. It was you in your house with your gun. That was your only line of defense. And they came in to take her gun. And if you saw this lady, she was in her probably 70s. And they tried to take her gun. And she said, you're not taking my gun. And they tackled her. And they took her gun. They broke her arm. And I found out about it. And I had Miss Connie come and testify and share her story. And once again, the NRA was right there with me, and we passed a bill to say never again will that happen, and it ultimately became a federal law to say you can never go door to door and take people's guns. Well, my friends, let me tell you, our gun rights are once again under attack. You can see it in this presidential debate that's already shaping up. And President Trump, who's doing a great job, is going to have a great story to tell next year. But you know who he's going to have to tell it against on that stage? It's not going to be some liberal. It's going to be a socialist. You can see what's going on already in this debate. Just look at the debate Monday night. And the president alluded to this. They asked him, you know, they're talking about letting felons vote while they're in prison. And so one of the questioners said, if the Boston Marathon bomber is there, would you let the Boston Marathon bomber vote from prison? And Bernie said yes, and Kamala said yes, and one after the other, they're all saying, sure, let them vote. I mean, imagine this. They're trying to take away your rights to defend yourself, which is enshrined in our Constitution, but they want felons who took the lives of innocent people to be able to have the franchise of voting. Not on our watch. And we ought to pay attention to all of those things that they're talking about as they move. It used to be, by the way, a party of moderates and liberals. That's where the Democrats used to be. And of course, Nancy Pelosi was the standard bearer as a San Francisco liberal. Well, today she's in the middle. And it doesn't mean the country's moved. It just means they've moved so far to where it's a party of liberals and socialists. And the socialists are winning. And everybody's paying attention. How many of you have heard of the Green New Deal? I mean, think about this. They want to ban fossil fuels as we stand here in Lucas Oil Stadium. They want to get rid of fossil fuels. Imagine if you can't even heat your home in the winter when you have a cold winter in Indiana or in New York. Or if you, by the way, in South Louisiana, it gets a little bit hot and we like running our air conditions. And it'd be great if you only had to use solar and wind power, and I'm all for renewable sources of energy, but you would kill the manufacturing base of this country if you got rid of fossil fuels. And all these people, by the way, who say in their Green New Deal, you shouldn't have airplanes in 10 years. You get rid of airplanes, you never have to worry about missing a flight or standing in a TSA line anymore. That's the good news. The bad news is, how are you going to get to where you're going? And good luck taking a high-speed rail train to Europe. And so they say all this stuff, but guess how they go around the country to tell people about it? They get in cars and they fly on airplanes that are fueled by fossil fuels. So the hypocrisy of it is on display. But everybody ought to know about it. And everybody ought to be paying attention to it because they really do believe in it. It's all about government control. Because when you look at where we are in this country today, this is not a socialist nation. But there are socialists trying to run this nation. And so as we expose what they're trying to do, it's really important that we keep talking about it, that we let other people know what they want to do, because some people just take these rights for granted and think that because it's in the Constitution, that it's never going to be touched, it's never going to be taken away. It's always being threatened. We always have to fight for our rights, whether we do it at the ballot box or whether we have men and women in uniform fighting for our rights across the country, or whether our great Border Patrol agents are helping to keep our border secure, which this president is also doing. We have to stand up for these rights every day. And you've got to show the contrast between what we want to do to give people more freedom. On health care, I want to protect people with pre-existing conditions, but I don't want some unelected government bureaucrat telling you what plan you can or can't buy. Remember all those people who promised you if you like what you have, you can keep it? You remember when Nancy Pelosi said you have to pass the bill to find out what's in it? Well, we know what's in it now. Millions of people lost the plan that they had. They were lied to by those people who said if you like what you have, you can keep it. You ought to be able to buy whatever plan you think is best for your family, and it's just you and your doctor making health care decisions, not some unelected bureaucrat from Washington. But that's the difference between us and them. It's about government control versus freedom. And think about this. As they're talking away, as they're trying to take away the rights of more law-abiding citizens, there is now a debate going on across this country that shouldn't even be a debate. And it's over whether or not a baby that's born alive outside the womb should still be able to be murdered under the guise of abortion. Well, let me tell you something. If a baby is born outside the womb and somebody tries to kill it, it's murder, and it ought to be murder not just in one state or 25 states. It ought to be illegal in every single state. And so we've got a bill by my colleague Ann Wagner of Missouri to make sure, it's called the Born Alive Act, that if a baby's born alive in every state of this country, it's got to get full protection. You can't kill it. It's not abortion. It is murder. And we need to get a vote on that bill and get that bill to President Trump's desk, because President Trump wants to sign that bill. His opponents, by the way, they would veto that bill. That shows you how far we've come in this country. And so if that's where we are, it's so important that we keep reminding people what's at stake. Why do we show up for a convention to represent and be a part of the National Rifle Association? It's because we care about our freedoms. We care about what is really important in this country. And I maybe have a little bit more appreciation for just how precious life is, just how precious the moments that we have are. After the shooting, when I finally came back, I was a little bit surprised when at first some people in the media started questioning me, going, well, you know, you were a victim of shooting, you must be against Second Amendment rights, you must be for more gun control. I said, well, let me tell you something. First of all, there's deep-rooted beliefs that I have, that we all have, and every one of us shares core convictions, whatever they are. I have some of those same core convictions that our founding fathers had. They didn't put gun rights in the Constitution originally because they never thought it would be under attack. It was an assumed right. They talked about it. They believed that every man and woman ought to have the right to defend themselves with firearms. And yet it did come under attack later. So when the Bill of Rights was being put together, they put that protection in as the Second Amendment to the Constitution. And so my core conviction goes back to what our country was rooted upon, what our foundation was rooted upon. Our rights do not come to us from some Supreme Court judge. Our rights don't come to us from Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. Our rights come to us from God, not lawmakers. It's God who gave us our rights. Our founding fathers believed in that. They talked about it. When people try to take away our foundational understanding that this was a nation founded under God, we always have to fight to defend that, because that's the core of what they're trying to do to take away and undermine our values, is take away the understanding that this was a nation rooted in the belief in God, not the establishment of a religion, but surely not the separation where you can't practice your faith and where you can't recognize this was a nation founded under God. And that's where our rights come from. And so when I was laying there on that ball field and there was a shootout going on, I never saw the shooter, but I could hear that it was coming from the third base side. And I was playing second base, and I hit the ground and I start crawling away into the outfield. Probably crawled about 20 feet. I saw a picture of a trail of blood that goes about that far. And that's around when my arms gave out. And when my arms gave out, I'm laying there and I'm just hearing gunfire. And I knew the only thing I could do at that point was to pray. I prayed to God. I had a private conversation with him. It was a serious conversation where I asked him for some pretty heady things. The first one was, I've got a young daughter. I said, God, please don't let Madison walk up the aisle alone. It's the first thing that came to my mind. And then I prayed that I could see my family again. And I got this unbelievable sense of calm that came over me because I put it in God's hands, and he took care of me. I could hear a second round of caliber gunfire being fired. You want to know why our Second Amendment rights are so important? If David Bailey and Crystal Griner with the United States Capitol Police were not there with guns to counter the shooter, he would have taken every single one of us out. That was his intention. He came with unlimited ammunition, but he was stopped because people who knew what they were doing and who had guns to stop him, even though they were outgunned, they were better at their jobs than he was. Thank God. And they stopped him. Those are real heroes. I celebrate our law enforcement before that happened, but even more now. Every man and woman in uniform that you see in law enforcement, thank them for their service, because they provide a valuable service, and they're not thanked enough. And they were there for me that day. They were there for all of us that day. And they are true American heroes. And I got to see heroes. I got to see miracles. And it's so important that we talk about that too, because in this day and age, it's easy to become jaded. It's easy to wonder, geez, is this still that great country, the shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan talked about? Well, you know what? Ronald Reagan talked about something else. Ronald Reagan said freedom is just one generation from extinction if we don't fight to defend it. I will tell you, this country is worth fighting for. Our freedoms are worth fighting for. I thank each and every one of you for being a part of the NRA, an organization that helps fight for those fundamental freedoms. This is the greatest country in the history of the world, and we're going to keep fighting to make sure it stays just that way. Thank you for everything you do. God bless these United States of America.